Hey, if you're new here, my name is Ross Campbell. Welcome to my channel. If you've been subscribed for some time now, you'll probably have noticed from the title and thumbnail of this video that I've got something a bit different in store for you guys today. I just returned from a 3-week long trip to America, which was amazing. I had 2 unforgettable weeks in Nashville, Tennessee, one of my favorite cities in the world. I filmed some really exciting content during the time that I had there, which will be coming out in the future, but I also went to LA for a few days at the end of the trip. And some of you guys may not know this, but back in January when I was at Winter NAMM in California, I met Tim Pierce. We were both at this sort of after party gathering thing, one of the nights during NAMM weekend, and I introduced myself, we got to talking, and that led to me going over to Tim's home studio to film a video for his own YouTube channel, which, if you haven't already seen, is linked in the description box below. So when I knew that I was going to be in LA again at the end of July, I thought, why not text Tim and see if he wants to do a video for my channel? And eventually we were able to do that. I'll talk more about that at the start of our interview, so you'll hear that story. So I paid another visit to Tim's home studio, we sat down, and I got to ask him questions about his career as a session guitar player in LA. If you already know who Tim Pierce is, then feel free to skip ahead to the interview itself. However, if you're in the minority of people watching who don't know about Tim and his impressive, to say the least, career as a session musician as well as his work on YouTube, go and check him out as soon as possible. Seriously, Tim is one of the top session guitar players, one of the top session musicians in the world, and has been for the past 40 years. And he also has an incredible YouTube channel where he teaches lessons and interviews players from all over the world. Some of my favorite players have featured on this channel, guys like Matthias Azato, Pete Thorne, Alan Hines, the list goes on. So do yourself a favor, go and subscribe to Tim on YouTube as soon as you're able to. And without further ado, here is my interview with the man himself, Tim Pierce. Tim, thanks for once again welcoming me into your home. Do some videos. It's great to be back here.
You are always welcome, although you live a bit far away.
Yeah. So we have to plan these things. We have to plan these things far in advance. And funny story about that. So I texted Tim about a week ago saying, "Hey, I'm going to be in LA for a few days. Would you like to meet up on the 27th of July and we'll do a video together?" And today is Saturday the 27th. And for some reason I thought that Friday was the 27th. So I rock up to Tim's house with my tripod, my camera bag, smile on my face. "Hey Tim, how are you doing?" He answers the door in his pajamas and he's like, "I'm doing good, Ross, but isn't this supposed to be tomorrow?" And oh man, honest to God, I wanted the ground to swallow me up whole. I was so embarrassed, but thanks for being cool about it.
Well, that's fine.
We got some breakfast, we got some coffee, it was all okay in the end.
We recovered well, and that's usually my mistake. I'm usually the one who gets the date wrong.
Okay,
so
well.
You're entitled, you're allowed.
Okay, so Tim, you've been working in LA as a session player for many years now, which means you've obviously seen that particular subsection of the music industry go through many changes over the years. You know, with the evolution of home recording, it seems as though we've seen sessions move further and further away from recording studios as people like yourself are able to do their work remotely at home.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, in your opinion, do you feel that the way sessions were done back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, do you feel that that was the golden age of session work, or do you feel that the time that we're in now, with the convenience of home recording, do you feel that we're now in the golden age of session work? What's your thoughts on that?
The golden age of session work, I think, had more to do with the amount of money that was being spent on records. So these days, that's a lot less. That being said, I've never felt better about being a session musician because I can deliver more in less time with a great deal of comfort if people are just willing to come over here and bring their songs. So these are the best of times for me actually doing this. There are a lot of musicians who miss the camaraderie of being in a room with 5 people. The problem with that for me is that tracking guitars on records, generally means that your work begins when everybody else's ends. So the bass player and drummer do their work. They're pretty first take animals. Bass and drums are often first, second take slots in the studio. But the guitar is much more exploratory. You don't know if your parts are going to be from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, or a combination of all of them. It can go 1,000 different directions. And I do like 8 parts on a song sometimes, 12 parts on a song. That's like playing 12 songs. So it's just a whole different job, really. And for me, all the best stuff always happened in overdubs anyway. There are other guitar players who the best stuff happened on the floor, as they say. But for me, it was always overdubs anyway. So I am happier now receiving clients. And also, back in the day when I had to go down to Capitol, I went to Capitol last Monday for a session. I get there early, you go through security, you have your gear brought in either via cartage or yourself. You set up your gear, you make sure it works. There's a buzz, there's a hum, you have to get rid of that. There's an enormous amount of setup to make sure that you're bulletproof at the moment of the downbeat of the session. I don't have to deal with that here because it's bulletproof. I can work it out. It's worked out.
Yeah.
So you come in, and if you and I don't joke around and you want me to play on your song, when you show up here and we don't tell jokes, we can be recording within 5 minutes.
Right.
If we talk and have a cup of coffee, then maybe it's 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. So the efficiency is amazing. I try and get people here because working by myself, I tend to take longer. I tend to try and perfect things that don't need to be perfected. I might go in a direction that the client doesn't want me to go. So I actually rarely accept internet sessions where I do it by myself and deliver it. Mm-hmm. I just price myself out of those because for me it's the actual, I want to know what you want on the song, I want to give it to you, I want us to share responsibility, and I want it to be done.
Okay, that's interesting that you bring that up because I've got a question that kind of will lead into that later on, but for now I just want to hear about your process for a studio session versus your process for a home recording session. So starting with the studio, let's say you get a call to go and do one track at Capitol Studios. Mm-hmm. Between the time you finish that call and the morning that you load your gear into the studio, what has to happen for you? Are you sent demos of the song to listen to in advance?
No, there's never everybody's too busy to do anything prior to the actual making of music. So you really do have to get used to not hearing or knowing anything. And indeed, sometimes you don't show up with the electric 12-string because there was never a conversation prior to the session about the essential need for the electric 12-string, and then you have to have it delivered or brought or whatever.
Wow.
The problem is people who are professionals in music, they don't really have time. Once the session is booked, I mean, there are, lately there have been some smart situations with Larry Klein where he said, hey, I need a baritone, I need a Gretsch, whatever. And that's really welcome because then I can make sure I show up with the right palette of stuff. But generally people err on the side of not knowing anything. And sometimes you get caught with your pants down. Mm. That's why in the 90s when cartage was in full bloom, or the 80s, you showed up with a truckload of gear. I would show up with racks and amps, 8 or 10 amps, speakers, racks, pedal boards, 40 guitars. I'm serious, 40 guitars. So that when somebody said, oh, do you have a Jaguar? I go, yeah. Mm-hmm. But these days things are leaner, so I might bring the stuff in my car. There are still people who bring cartage. So back to your original question. If you have cartage, you call the cartage company, you tell them about the delivery. If you have stuff at home you want to bring, you get it ready the night before.
Okay.
For me, there's a traffic issue in LA getting to Hollywood from here because I live kind of in the mountains here in Tarzana, and so I have to allow an hour to get into town. I have to allow getting parked, getting unloaded, or if the cartage company comes, making sure they're there on time, making sure the stuff's set up right. So there's a lot of activity the morning of the session.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And when it comes to a session where you're working on a track from home, I assume in some ways that is a very different process, but before you mentioned that, I'd always assumed that you would mostly, for the most part, do them alone here, but you're saying that the artist or producer will almost always be here?
Well,
like, supervising and...
I'm glad you had that misconception, because I do like to correct that.
Mhm.
I'm not interested in working alone, mainly because the responsibility, I'm producing then. And if I'm working alone, I'm producing and playing, and I can't charge enough for that. I mean, I already price myself out of a lot of sessions, but if people don't come here, I can give them the exact things they want in half the time or a quarter of the time.
Of course.
If I sit here and spend an hour on some, Leslie part in the bridge, or perfecting some solo that they don't even want, then I've wasted my time, and I charge for my time. So, yeah, I require people to either be present in the room or on Skype. I'll do that sometimes.
Okay.
If they'll sit with me on Skype,
yeah,
that's fine. But there are some people I work alone for who I trust, who pay me a fee, and they don't ask for revisions, and I flow through it and I go fast. But you have to earn that trust with me.
Mm-hmm. And in a recording studio like Capitol, there's obviously a lot of added pressure. There's a lot of people listening intently to every note that you play, and I think that the whole red light fever thing is something that a lot of guitar players struggle with, myself included. So how have you learned to deal with that over the years?
Well, for me, I was lucky because I moved here and started recording right away. So I had thousands of opportunities, and that's not an exaggeration, to learn to cope with that. It never goes away, but
right.
You learn to cope with it. And then some players don't worry about it at all. The thing is, we're not doing live to vinyl disc records. We're not doing live. It's almost harder if you're on, like I did the Grammys a number of years ago with Glenn Campbell, and I had to play a Jerry Reed part. It was really demanding. And when we did the rehearsal, Paul McCartney was sitting in the front row watching us. It was like, oh, this is getting serious. And then I noticed that the camera close-up guy was on me with a red light on when I played this riff. And it's a very complicated riff. And it's a riff that I had rehearsed about 200 times, because I knew I had to get this thing right. And the pressure of being on the Grammys and having to play this riff live in front of a national audience, and in front of all these people at Paul McCartney's level in the front, and 3 rows, and I didn't make a mistake, and I was so thankful for it.
I've got sweaty palms just like listening to you talk about that.
Jay DeMarcus from Rascal Flatts texted me right after that and said, dude, man, that was great. And it was like, oh, gosh.
Yeah. That's pretty... I guess that's about as high pressure situations as it gets.
The studio, you can always fix your part. I mean, you want to get... But the thing about guitar, any instrument, that people want to hear your joy and your enthusiasm, and if you make a mistake, it can be fixed. But, if you're giving them a great performance, then the mistakes are just, they're forgivable in the studio, to a point. I mean, so you still have to get things... Let me back up a second. A drummer really has to get it right from beginning to end the first time. So they're kind of first take animals. But the guitar, they want to hear your ideas. And you do have to get it quick. If you do have a mistake, you have to fix it in one take.
Oh, okay.
So that's the thing. I mean, the pressure's still there. But for guitar, if you're reaching and you're giving them great ideas, then that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good way to segue into the next question, which is about ideas. So another thing that all musicians struggle with on not a daily basis, but very often, is a lack of inspiration. And I want to hear how you deal with days where you're in a studio, you're in that high pressure environment, and the ideas are just not flowing like you want them to be. Have you come up with ways of getting around that? Or
what really helps is having other people in the room, and knowing, oddly, the pressure. You see, when somebody brings me a song, I kind of have to make their dreams come true in a very, and it sounds pretentious, but it's not really. I have to actually make their song sound amazing instantly. And that kind of pressure forces you to cycle through ideas quickly. If something's a failure, you try something else, and you try something else, you try something else. And then maybe you ask somebody, what should we try? Oh, oh, you want something that sounds like Brian Setzer? Okay, we can do that. Or that's The Killers. Oh, I love that song by The Killers. We'll try something like that. And you just cycle through stuff as quick as possible. And, you know, it's kind of an emergency, and you just keep pushing. The situation actually propels you forward. I mean, it's constant failure. I mean, you're constantly putting stuff out that doesn't work and then finding something that works immediately.
Yeah.
And after a while, though, you get an instinct for what will work, but there's a danger in that, because then if you're playing the Coldplay part that works on every song that then you're not really reaching, and you're not really... So there's a danger in having a bag of tricks that works every time.
Yeah, and I suppose you're probably conscious of the fact that you don't want to be playing this one thing that you played on a Selena Gomez record and then playing that on someone else's record.
Exactly.
You know?
You can't help it somewhat, but it happens.
Mm-hmm. And in the studio environment, you know, when you're there with a band and producers and engineers, going back to what you were saying earlier, there's obviously like camaraderie.
Yeah.
That is something that I guess session musicians will miss nowadays. Do you have any, I mean, you've done so many sessions over the years, but do you have any particularly fond memories of working in the studio with musicians that could be positive or negative? Like, has anything like outrageous happened where you've just felt quite uncomfortable in the studio?
Of course. I did a session for Richard Perry once, and he was a pretty brutal, known for his kind of brutality in the studio.
Uh-huh.
The artist was Randy Travis, and he was kind of yelling at me in front of all the other players, and these were the top, like 7 of the top players. And it was awful, and I remember leaving the set. I actually almost walked out, and the reason I didn't is because I thought, okay, I'm going to make it harder on these 7 guys sitting here if I walk out. So I'm just going to take it and do it. And then I remember at the end of the session, Randy Travis looked at me. He felt so sorry for me. He was so nice. But you know, that day, my second session was with Trevor Horn. And so I went from that horrible experience to a Rod Stewart record with Trevor Horn. And Trevor Horn treated me like, he treated me so well, and we did all this great work on a Rod Stewart record, and I worked with Trevor for 15 years straight after that. So it was really a victory, you know, the worst and the best in one day. And that's how it was. That's how session work was. You never know what's going to happen. You really don't. I mean, I brought up Rascal Flatts. I got to work with Rascal Flatts with Dan Huff producing, and that was a dream, because you have the greatest guitar player, arguably maybe the greatest studio guitar player ever, sitting there managing the music for everybody, and it just felt amazing. It was amazing. You know, because you know whatever you do, he's going to appreciate, and if he has an idea, it's going to be the right idea, and you're going to sail through, you know, anything that you might have a problem with, he's going to solve for you immediately. So it was awesome. And the great thing about it, we were up in Santa Barbara, and he was on the road. I got to hang out with him in the evening every night too, so that was nice too.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. It was as always really interesting to hear your stories, and yeah, thanks for watching, guys. So there you have it. That was my interview with Tim Pierce. Now, before I wrap this video up, just want to say that I've been doing YouTube full-time for about 2 years now, and it's only been in the past year or so of attending NAMM shows in Nashville and California. It's only the past year or so of doing that I've been able to network with people who do the same thing that I do, which is make a living as a musician on YouTube. Now, I'm a very introverted person, so for me, flying to a different country alone and putting myself in those situations where I have to, you know, network with people, I have to introduce myself to people who I've never met but I admire, that's tough for me. It scares me. As silly as it may sound, it is a daunting thought for me. And I just wanted to say that Tim is up there with some of the nicest, most genuine people I've had the pleasure of meeting over the past year as a result of me doing YouTube full time. So once again, please go and subscribe to Tim's channel. You will not regret it. Trust me on that. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.